Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 group, and I'm here tonight with Terry Cowdrey. And I'm going to introduce Terry in a minute, but before I do, I'd love to know in the chat. I'm assuming, honestly, everybody who's here tonight has a senior because that's who we sent the invites out to, and you're probably the ones most interested in this topic about early decision and early action results. If you're willing, you don't have to share like where your student applied, but if your student has heard back from any sort of early admission results, again, you don't even have to tell us what the results were, but just give us a sense if your student has heard anything yet, or if they're still waiting. That would be kind of like interesting for us to know. Okay, heard from some, still waiting. Okay. Only heard back from 1 out of 19 schools. Okay, great. Thank you for letting us know. Just, helpful to hear what's going on in the world. And we're kind of like just at the start. I mean, there's definitely been some schools that have sent their results, but probably in the next 2 weeks, we're going to have, just a lot of them, share all of their information. Okay, great. Well, thanks for sharing, everyone. So I asked Terry to put together her thoughts on kind of what early action, early decision results mean, how you as a parent should interpret them, how you should, maybe share your thoughts with your student, and kind of what you and your students should decide to do as next steps, based on some of the results that you might be hearing. And so Terry has some slides that she's going to put together. And just as a quick background, and Terry can share a little bit more about herself. Terry was the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Colby College. And then before that, the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at St. Lawrence. And then for the past 10 years, she has been consulting with many, many colleges on enrollment management and plays the role as interim dean at many colleges. And right now, Terry, you're actually doing interim dean at Hendrix, right?
Right.
So yes. A ton of experience. This is really kind of been your career, right? Like from the beginning, almost, Terry, in admissions and enrollment management. Was there a time you ever did anything else?
There wasn't. I was one of those admissions people who started as a student worker. And decades later, I'm still working with young people in the transition to college and with the offices that assist them. But one of the nice things through all those years is I have worked at schools with both early decision and schools with early action. So I've seen sort of it from the inside, and hope to share some information tonight, particularly for those of you who are still waiting to hear on that early decision school. But I'll touch on both early decision and early action.
Okay, great. So Terry has slides. She's going to walk through them, but as always, feel free, put your questions, comments in the chat. I will interrupt Terry if it's, appropriate. And then at the end, we will just, answer general questions, or I'll also scroll back to see if there's anything else we haven't answered.
All right, well, let's just get started here. And I think that one of the reasons why I'm glad that we're doing this on December 8th is that typically the first round of early decisions come out around December 15th. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that's traditionally when students and families start to hear. So I want to talk a little bit about the different responses for early decision, what the different possibilities might be, and then some of the ways in which you as a parent can both respond to these decisions, but also help your sons and daughters respond. And then I also want to hit on some of the common issues that admitted students have, because it's not only the students who don't get good news that sometimes have questions about their early decision school. So the first thing I just want to say again, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, and I know there is at least one family here with a junior. Early decision, the language is consistent in the industry, and that really means that a student has applied to one college and declared that one college their first choice. And the colleges benefit by having early decision because it allows schools to build a foundation of their class early in the year that they can count on, that they know for each student they admit, or nearly each student they admit, that student will enroll. When I left Colby College in 2014, we were enrolling about 52% of our class through early decision. I haven't followed it enough to know what they're doing now. It could be very different now, but I give you that as an example. At other places I've been, it's always been more than a third of the class, and often up to that middle, sort of 50% range. Colleges also benefit with early decision because it can help them be targeted on some special populations that sometimes there are at least a couple of colleges out there that tell students that if they are children of alumni, they will have an advantage at early decision, but only at early decision. And so if the child of an alum wants that leg up as a legacy, they need to do that. They need to make that commitment to enroll. Some schools focus on some of their athletes for early decision. But again, because in most cases, each of the students who is admitted early decision actually enrolls, it allows the college to have a lower admit rate. And we all know that the selectivity of a college is defined in large part by how low their admit rate is, how popular they are, and how few students they admit.
And Terry, in addition to decreasing the admit rate, doesn't it also just mathematically increases the yield?
Oh, absolutely, because it is nearly 100% yield on early decision students, or at least in the high 90s, because occasionally there's a change that occurs. So yes, it decreases the admit rate, it increases the yield, and furthermore, it allows the college to admit and know they're going to enroll a really great group of students that they can count on, that they know in the spring, the students they're admitting under regular decision will likely have many choices, and they don't know which ones will choose them. The benefits to students certainly are there as well. They complete the college process 100% completed earlier, which for some students allows them really to focus on making the spring of their senior year really their best semester yet, without their time being diverted to the college search process. And then for some students, it's also a way to gain access to a highly selective college because they are saying, I love you the most, and I promise to attend if, in fact, you offer me admission. So there really are benefits to both the students and to the colleges.
So Terry, there was a
Yes.
question about which schools give a preference to legacy. Not that I would expect you to know that offhand, but like there's also been a little bit of controversy in the past few years about whether that should be the case, and some schools have backed off of that.
Yes, certainly some schools have, but those that are still doing it, I see more and more that are saying we're only going to give that advantage under early decision. We no longer will give it under regular. So yes, not every school considers legacy as a positive in the admissions process, but the number of schools that have said they're not going to consider it is still relatively small when you think about the number of colleges overall.
And so
Um,
it's okay. I mean, if you're a legacy, I mean, if you as the parent went to a school and your student's interested in going, to ask the school what their policy is.
Absolutely, without a doubt, and there should be real clarity there. And I think I can think of one school where I worked where it was absolutely a positive, because there was a real commitment at that school for there to be sort of whole family groups who went to that college, grandparents, parents, siblings. And so there was a sense of community that was being established. This was a smaller college. So yes, some schools are considering legacy connections in the admissions process, others are not. I will say with early action, the goal there for most admissions offices is to simply get more of the work done earlier. Because with early action, with a couple of exceptions, the student does not have to declare that it's a first choice. They can apply to half a dozen schools or a dozen schools early action if they want to. It simply moves that review of the applications earlier in the year, which can be helpful both for the colleges and for the student. But traditionally with early action, the students still have until May 1st to make their enrollment choice. They can still compare financial aid and scholarships, but they just know what some of their options are going to be at an earlier part of the senior year. So to talk just again a little bit about the overall college admissions process, these are somewhat reminders for some of you who have heard me speak before. Colleges are organizations that operate in a self-interested way. It's important. They admit the students who they think are going to thrive and contribute at their school, and they're shaping a class. And so the competition each year for an individual student is often dependent on what that college is seeking in that year and who else is applying. You cannot, as a parent, control the college admissions decision, but you can control how you react to it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, because your son or daughter, they are watching your reaction. And what I think all of you will agree to is that if the news is not good news from an early decision or early action application, you don't want to kind of make your son or daughter feel worse by having them feel that they've really let you down, let their parents down. And again, just remember, there are dozens of colleges out there where your sons and daughters will be successful and happy. But sometimes when the early decision is no, you have to do some regrouping. So first we'll talk about a deferral. Many years ago, for some of the parents on the call who went to college yourselves, you may be familiar that early decision had two things that could happen. Either students were admitted or they were deferred. And when they were deferred, they got a letter that said, we'd like to consider your application in the context of all of the applications we review this year. In some cases, their letter would say, we'd like to see more of your senior grades or more testing or those sorts of things. But it was really a binary choice. You were either admitted early decision or your application was deferred to be considered later. Probably 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, colleges, at the request actually of school counselors, began denying students at early decision, rejecting applications at early decision. And so there are now three things that can happen at most colleges: admit, defer, or deny. Not every college denies at early, but the colleges that do so because they know, based on their recent history, that the students are not going to be competitive in their overall pool in the spring. And so they're giving them that answer now and telling them, you need to make other plans. This isn't an option for you. So we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But those who are deferred, really important to read the letter carefully. Each school is going to be a little different in what they say and what they ask for. And often the schools are not sending a paper letter. So as parents, you're going to need to make sure that you're communicating with your son or daughter so that you're able to see the letter that the student receives in their student portal. Again, for most colleges. You need to make sure that your student understands the instructions that are provided, because again, each college is a little bit different in what they're going to ask for. Some will ask for you to simply click a button to say, yes, I would like my application considered in the spring. But others will, and your son or daughter might say yes, probably will say yes. Sometimes they'll have changed their mind and they'll say no. That might be all you need to do for one college, whereas another college is going to ask your son or daughter to make sure they get a mid-year transcript submitted or end of winter trimester if they're on trimesters. They may ask for additional testing if tests have been submitted, but there are additional scores that they haven't received. They might ask, rather than just clicking a button, yes, please continue to consider me, they might ask your son or daughter to write a letter, a short statement about their continued interest in the particular college. They could ask for an interview. They could ask for an additional letter of recommendation. Any or all of the things in this menu may be something that the students asked to do if their application is deferred and they are still interested in being considered. The important thing to know as a parent, especially if you're going through this the first time, is that once a student is deferred under early decision, they are no longer obligated to attend that college if they are admitted in the spring. So they are now given full reign to consider other colleges. If they are admitted to the school where they've been deferred and they hear that about that late March, they may decide to go to that college, but maybe by late March, they've fallen in love with a different school. So there's no longer any obligation involved once a student has been deferred. Probably the most important advice on this that I have is for you or your son or daughter to ask the college directly, what are their statistics for the last couple of years for the percentage of deferred students who then are ultimately admitted? I think that will give you insight into the chances, because, or I should say, because the schools that deny are now deferring fewer students, that actually can be a helpful thing for a deferred student to know that they're in a smaller pool of students that are not being admitted early, but are still in contention. If it's a college with early decision where they don't deny at ED, this question's even more important to ask, because you don't really have a sense of whether your son or daughter's application is a strong one to be reconsidered in the spring, or is really they're really just delaying telling your son or daughter that it's not going to be an option.
So Terry, there's really almost like two questions there, because if your student gets deferred, you don't necessarily know whether the school is actually sending out denials or not, because your student can get one. So first, so it's really to, I guess, ask the school, are they, denying students? Because then the fact that your student got deferred kind of puts a different light on it. And then to your point, your question about what percentage of students who get deferred actually get admitted. And I'm just curious, and I'm sure it varies by school to school. Do you think that there would be, like, schools will actually share that information?
I think most schools will, because there is an interest. The way that I would describe it is as follows. If they defer only a few students, and it's a relatively high percentage that ultimately get admitted, they're going to be happy to tell you that. If, in fact, they defer many students and they ultimately admit a small percentage, they'll still be happy to tell you that, because they would just as soon the student who's deferred go and find another college to be in love with, right? So in some ways, it's actually helpful on both sides. I think what you'll find is that depending on who you're talking to, especially if you're talking to a less experienced admission staff person, they may not have the information, but you can certainly ask them to, get back to you, seek it out and get back to you. The question about whether the school denies at ED or not, your school counselors will often know that. And sometimes the website will actually say, where they'll talk about the early decision process and then say, you will either be admitted or deferred, or you will be admitted, deferred, or denied. That information tends to be more public, the kind of what the options are versus the percentage of deferred students ultimately admitted. And moving to the deny, I think this fits nicely in that getting a deny at early decision is for most students, a really painful thing. So I'm sorry if any of your kids will experience that in the next week or 10 days, but it is so much better in the end than getting what we call a courtesy deferral. Because if in fact that student has no chance of getting in the spring, keeping them on the line and keeping them excited about that college is not very fair, to be honest. And so in some ways, as hard as it is to get bad news in December, it allows you to then regroup and reassess. And that's where, if you can include the school counselor, or if you're working with an independent consultant, include them in that conversation. Because it is a time where it's going to be important for there to be kind of a reality check with the applications that with the other schools that your son or daughter may ultimately apply to. In my experience at many colleges, it is very rare that you can appeal the denied decision. There are families every year who will say, well, can you defer him instead of denying him? He'll send you his mid-year grades, et cetera, et cetera. In my experience, the answer is usually no, because if the student was close to meeting the admissions competition, they would have been deferred already. It is really important to know that when a student is denied an early decision, then they're done with that college. They can't then reapply regular decision. They might be able to apply, certainly could apply as a transfer student down the road, but it's not like the processes are discrete and you didn't get in early, but you can apply again regular. When you are denied at early decision, you're done that year for that school year. The only other thing I would advise on here, and I'm happy to take questions about this, but is sometimes you're going to want to talk to your child about how they want to share this news. And there are families I know who have taken the path of, well, he really changed his mind and he decided he didn't really want that school after all. So he's thinking about other things now. Now, are you going to say he got in, but he's changed his mind? No. Are you going to say he got denied, but he changed his mind? Maybe not. Maybe you're just going to say, the more we talked about it and thought about it, his interest in that school really, really lessened, and he's looking at some other options. It's just important, I think, for the student to have some control over who knows their business. This college process is really private business, but in our society, it becomes pretty public pretty fast. So there are next steps to take. And I talked about regrouping and reassessing for the denies, but it's actually also important for students who are deferred from early decision. First of all, if your son or daughter has already submitted other applications, but they haven't gotten any answers yet, you want to make sure with your child and potentially with the school counselor that they're not all as selective as that early decision school. So I'll use a kind of crazy example, but if they applied early decision to an Ivy and and are not admitted, but then they've applied only to other Ivies, that's not a wise strategy for gaining admission. They need to make sure that some of the schools are not as selective. Some of you on the chat had already said that some of your student has heard from some schools, some early action schools or rolling admission schools already, and has been admitted. So in some ways, that's terrific. They already have some options. And so your need to regroup and reassess isn't as sort of critical as it is for the family where the student hasn't heard back from any other school and now gets a deny or a deferral from their one ED school. One of the hard things about this, because we all know December's kind of can be very busy anyway for lots of reasons, a lot of college deadlines are in early January. And so they may get bad news on December 13th, which of course it's Friday the 13th this year, and then have to be ready to get an application in by January 1st or January 15th. And so you need to help your son or daughter not kind of shut down, but stay on top of this. One of the things that I think can be really helpful when they're disappointed about a decision is ask them to think about and then articulate what were the things, the features, the elements of that school that made it their first choice. Because if they can articulate the reasons why, the factors that went into them really having that school elevated above the others they were considering, then you can then confirm that the other schools already on their list have those features too, or that you might be able to identify additional schools that have those features. Because again, I know students could say sometimes it's just felt right, but I'm a firm believer that multiple schools can feel right if they have the right ingredients that the student values. The other thing that's important, but again, it's very human reaction. We see sometimes when a student does not get admitted to their early decision or early action school, that they overreact and they hit submit, 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 like it's just a button they're punching. And I guess my image I have of it is like a slot machine that they just can't stop hitting that button. And what you don't, it's a totally natural reaction to think, oh gosh, I need to apply to more schools to enhance my chances. But in fact, it's not a thoughtful way to do it. And you could end up with the student, if they say, for example, they apply to 20 schools, they could end up with 15 denies in the spring and only 5 admits. That's okay. They have 5 good choices, presumably, but it can really be a hit on the ego to have a lot of denies piling up because you've overextended the number of schools out of kind of reactive fear of not gaining admission anywhere. I want to talk just a little bit about early action. As I said before, that though it's similar to early decision, early action has not asked the student to declare that they will definitely enroll if they're admitted. And so certainly there are students who apply to multiple colleges early action. There are a couple of exceptions to that. There are a couple of exceptions of schools that offer what's called single choice early action, and they have quite stringent regulations around a student applying only to their college early action, but that's the exception, not the rule. And so you do have students who might apply to several schools early action. One of the things that's important to do if a negative decision comes in, if a deferral comes in early action, or if a deny comes in early action, I should say, is to ask your son or daughter if they're still interested in that school. Because it was not necessarily their first choice. Their interests may have changed since August, if that's when they started submitting applications. And so they may or may not want to continue to pursue that early action school that at this point has put them off until the spring. Again, that could happen with early decision as well, but it's more rare with early decision because the student has identified a particular school as top choice. One of the things you can do with your sons and daughters, and again, they could do with their school counselors, is to look at the student part of the application to see if there's anything that your son or daughter might do to strengthen that application for other schools. A couple of examples. Perhaps they submitted their application in September when school was just starting. And by the end of the fall, they were named to the county all academic soccer team, or they were cast as a lead role in a school theater production, or they completed their Girl Scout Gold project. Could be all kinds of different things, academic or co-curricular. So if there's new information, that's one way to strengthen an application. If Now, upon reflection, the student rereads their essay or other parts that they've submitted on the application, and they feel like they haven't told their story as well as they might have. They can think about adding additional information in to the other schools to which they apply. There's not a magic formula, and I don't want any of you to leave this call thinking, oh, if he doesn't get in, it must be that his application wasn't well done, because that's probably more frequently not the case than it is the case. But it's still important, I think, to just do a review to say, gosh, is this telling my story the best it can? Again, same thing with early action deferrals as with early decision deferrals. You don't want to overreact and go overboard with applying to a great number of schools because of out of fear about what opportunities the student might ultimately have. I want to talk just for a couple of minutes about admit decisions, and then we can go to questions. So celebrate the student has been admitted early decision or early action to a school they really love, and they can start really imagining themselves in college because they have now the campus where they can see themselves. Really important is that you confirm that the financial obligation after financial aid and scholarship is awarded, if it is going to be acceptable to your family before you confirm enrollment. I can think of a case a number of years ago where there was a young woman who applied to a highly selective liberal arts college that did not offer merit scholarships, only need-based financial aid. Her family did not qualify for sufficient aid for her parents to feel that they could afford for her to go there. So she gained admission to her first choice school through ED, but did not get the aid that her family had hoped for. And so in that case, she told the college she wouldn't be able to enroll, and asked the college to give her in writing a release from her early decision commitment, which they happily did. I mean, I'm sure they weren't happy to lose the student, but they understood the family circumstance. So that then she can apply to other colleges, and if a college asks, you know, or if she somehow shares that she had been an early decision candidate, the other colleges know, okay, but she's been truthful with that other college that she's not enrolling. She's not trying to game the system. She's being honest and upfront with both the college that she got admitted to but couldn't afford, and now the colleges that she's applying to. So that financial piece is really important to make sure that you feel comfortable with what you're going to be asked to pay. Very much similar to the when the family gets bad news, when your child gets good news, let them take the lead in choosing when and how to share their news. You may be dying to tell your neighbors or somebody at work or the person at the gym or whatever, but it's really up to your son or daughter to get to sort of decide who knows when. And one of the really important things is to remember that your child's friends may not all be getting good news. So imagine the scenario: your child gets admitted early decision to her dream school, her best friend gets denied early decision to her dream school. That's a challenging thing for these kids to navigate over the next few weeks. Most friendships will last through this if the kids are really have a deep friendship there, but you have to be a little bit careful because I think you can also really unintentionally, in your happiness, have it be a kind of painful situation for either your child's friends or the parents of your children's friends. For ED admits, again, you need to make sure that you're reading the letter carefully. Some schools will only put it on the portal, so it'll just be a digital offer of admission. Other schools will send a paper copy for admitted students as a follow-up. There's typically an enrollment fee or deposit that is due by a specific date, and the student typically has to sign and submit a form confirming that they understand the financial obligation, that they will be enrolling, and that they will withdraw any other applications that they have in process, or decline any early action or rolling admission admit decisions they've already received. You need to make sure that if there are required financial aid forms or scholarship applications that the student needs to follow up with, even though they've now been admitted, they may have gotten an estimated aid award and still have to do some follow-up. There may be additional scholarships that they can apply for, talent or special interest scholarships. So you want to stay on top of that. I mentioned ensuring that your son or daughter withdraws the applications that they have in process, if they have any, at other schools, and make sure they turn down those early action offers that they already have in hand. As parents, I think one of the opportunities you have is to follow the college on social media. You can, some schools will allow you to join parent groups on social media even before your child matriculates or enrolls next fall. And you can get a sense of kind of what's going on. One of the things I recommend is you could just do a Google alert for the college name. And every time the college is in the news for any reason, you'll get an email with that Google alert, and just helps you stay up to date, learn more about what's happening. Most early decision admitted students and all early action admitted students are invited to attend the admitted student events that are held on campus in the spring. It is not in any way expected or required of an early decision student to do so, because clearly they've already made their choice. At the same time, it can be an opportunity to meet some classmates and to get another sense of the campus, to learn that much more in anticipation of that transition to the college. So that's something that you can decide as a family. Couple of challenges with admitted ED. So the first one, buyer's remorse. Your child has decided they don't really want to go to that school that they really wanted to go to in August when they, or September or October when they applied early decision. As I had years ago told a young admissions counselor, there are no ED police. There is no one that's going to say, but yes, you applied early and we admitted you, so we are going to force you to come to our college. That won't happen. However, they need to be sure, because if they say to the college, I'm thrilled that I was offered ED admission. Some things have changed in my interests, and I now am no longer interested in enrolling. That's a fair thing for them to say, but they need to know that then they're done. The college is going to be, it would be a rare college that would say, well, okay, we'll now just give you till May 1st to decide. Either they take the offer at early, or they decline the offer and they're moving on to other colleges. But it should never be a feeling of doom that your son or daughter has doomed themselves to go to a college that they once loved but no longer do. Common one is the scholarship and aid was not as much as you had hoped for, and you want to now compare offers in
Sorry,
the spring.
Terry,
Go ahead.
can I go back to that one for a
Certainly.
second? I'm just kind of combining something you said from an earlier slide. I guess in theory, this, a student, if they're going to change their mind, kind of really needs to make that decision before they pull applications from other places.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Debbie, that there are some things that happen in order.
Yeah.
And so it is important that a student know that, and again, I would say probably 90% of the time, that's really a guess, but students applied early decision because they fell in love with a college, they get admitted and they're excited and they're wearing the sweatshirt the next day and ready to go. But there are some students who are just they either have a whole variety of interests, or they tend to be young people whose interests just do change from Monday to Friday, and they just no longer feel like it's the right fit school. But it is, as Debbie just said, it would be important if you were going to decline that early offer to do so before pulling your applications from the other colleges. Absolutely.
And you tell me, Terry, I know your comment about there isn't like an ED police. I would hate, honestly, to know that this type of situation could happen where a student doesn't pull their applications and then changes their mind after seeing someplace else that they've gotten in.
So it's an interesting thing. The colleges do actually communicate, a lot of them, with one another. And so I'll use an example from when I was at St. Lawrence, and we had a student who we had admitted early decision. And later in the spring, no, I've got this backwards. We had a student who we admitted regular decision, and he wanted to come, which was great from our perspective, until we learned that he was declining an ED offer that he had already accepted from Colgate University.
Wow.
And so ultimately, both Colgate and St. Lawrence pulled his offer. So
Sure.
it was no longer an option for him to go to either of those colleges. He had signed a statement, and we had a copy of it at Colgate that said, I will withdraw all my applications and I will not submit any new ones. So he had attested to his promise. His parents and his school counselor had also signed it. And so in that case, we felt like the best option was to say, you would have violated our honor code on both of our campuses if you had done
Before even
like
enrolling.
Exactly. And so enrolling was no longer a choice.
Right.
So it's dicey business. And I guess what I would say is that going back to the point about there are no ED police, but it's something to be considered seriously, in that the student has signed a commitment. The parent, at least one parent, has signed the commitment typically, and usually the school counselor. I know of one case where a school counselor was quite flippant about a student changing their mind because they felt they would get more playing time in their sport at another college. So they backed off from an ED commitment. And with that particular college, they wrote to the principal and said, for the next 5 years, we will not take any early decision students from your school. That was a religious school, ironically, and in the Northeast. And so there was a penalty for the future students because that student, again, had not, it wasn't a matter of, oh my goodness, I think I've made a mistake. It was, I really want something that they perceived as better, ultimately. To go back to the scholarship and aid just for a moment here, there's a big difference between the scholarship and financial aid are not sufficient for us to afford the college versus the scholarship and aid were not as much as we had hoped, and now we want to compare offers. In that case of it's not sufficient, it doesn't, the student is not going to be able to enroll because the parents are not able to afford the school. In the case of wanting to compare, there's really that sense of, gosh, this is more than we thought we would have to pay. We really want to see whether we can find another school that is more generous with their scholarship or aid. In my experience with schools that have early decision programs, if a family says, we really want to be able to compare offers in the spring, unless there is a major family financial change, like a parent has lost a job between when the student applied and when they were notified of admission, the family is usually told that it's either now or never. Either you say yes now and you plan to enroll based on what we have offered you, or you're done with this particular college. So again, it's fine if financially you feel you must walk away, but don't confuse that with saying, this would be a stretch for us, so we want to see if we can get a better deal. But if we can't get a better deal, he still wants to come here. That's not how early decision works. And really, it's now or never, typically with the financial piece of it.
And I'll just add to that, Terry, and I can't say this with 100% certainty, but a lot of the colleges that I see that have early decision actually also tend to have a very good net price calculators.
Yes.
So I kind of, to this point about not being able to, or wanting to wait and, compare offers, or I find that it's families, and we encourage them to really, if you're going to do the net price if you're going to allow your student to apply early decision, to do the net price calculator and feel comfortable with that result. If you don't feel comfortable with that result, then that's a little bit on you if you've then decided to let your student continue to apply there.
I agree completely. And the one thing I would add is, if the results of your net price calculator that led you to feel comfortable for your son or daughter to apply don't match up with the offer, ultimately, that's a perfect time to talk to the financial aid office. Because there is a human part of all of this, and there could be an error one place or the other. It is really important that the data that has been analyzed is the same input. But you always are welcome to say, here's what our net price calculator read. This doesn't match up with what we're seeing on the estimated aid award. Can you help us understand? But it's a great point, particularly for any of the families on the call that are parents of juniors or younger. Doing the net price calculator before making an early decision commitment is a really wise thing to do. The last slide I just have here is just, I think there will be some families across the country in a couple of weeks who are just parents, especially, who are just confused. Why wasn't my son or daughter, who is remarkable, why were they not offered early decision admission? And so the hard news there is that at many colleges, though not at all, the ability to pay is part of it. And there is a certain amount of, just as there's a certain expectation for how many students will be admitted and enrolled through early decision, there's also an expectation of how much revenue will be generated from those students. There's great financial aid available at early decision, but it's not limitless. And so for some students, the ability for them to pay, or for the family to pay, may have an effect. Also difficult but real is that the student is very capable, but they're not distinctive in the applicant pool at a particularly highly selective college. They're perfectly competent, prepared student who's a good kid and would be a great roommate and classmate. But at early decision, there are times where that's not going to be enough to obtain one of those precious spots in the class. And then certainly the two first bullets lead into the third, which is there are schools that limit the percentage they enroll through early programs, where there is a notion of no more than 40% of our target class. No more than 50%, whatever it might be. It could be lower than that as well. I just chosen those as examples. And so depending on the number of people who apply early in any given year, the number of students who apply, if in fact they can only enroll a certain percentage of their class through early decision, that it's not a first come, first served kind of process. It's still a competition, though in a smaller pool of students. So that isn't going to answer for you specifically or your son or daughter specifically, but those are some of the reasons why that students are not admitted early decision. I will also, I mean, there's also the case where there is a student who applies early who's not well prepared, who doesn't have a strong GPA, who isn't very interesting. I mean, so there are also students who wouldn't make it if they applied early or regular or at all to a particular college. But there are some really great kids who don't get admitted early to their school of choice for some of these other factors. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions about early decision, early action, or anything that this conversation has sparked.
Yeah, no, there's the questions here. Let me share them, and then we'll see if anybody has some more. One question is a little particular. I don't know if you know this, Terry. Well, there's two parts to the question. One is if a student applies early action and they get deferred, does their application kind of automatically get sent over for general admission, or is there something that that they might have to do to make sure it gets moved to regular admission?
So at some colleges, the letter, this is where reading the letter is so important. At some colleges, they will say, your application will be considered in March. There are others that will say, please respond yes or no, indicating whether you are interested in continuing to being considered as a potential student at our school. So you want to be careful that if in fact it's that the school falls into that latter category, if your son or daughter does want to continue to be considered, you want to make sure they've responded.
And the other part of this question is, well, they're asking in particular, what if their student applied for a direct admit nursing program? And maybe you can expand that because they may be a student is applying to a specific program within the college and they didn't get offered a spot. Does that mean, is there any chance that they could kind of go back and apply to like a different program at the college?
That's a terrific question. I can think specifically of a case when I worked at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, where there, at the time I was there, and I believe it's still the case, there are 4 different schools with undergraduate programs. And a student had applied to one of the schools, early decision, was not admitted. And through conversation with the student and with her dad, the decision was made, she made the request to apply regular decision for one of the other colleges at Vanderbilt. And we gave her permission to do that. And she ultimately was admitted. She had to jump through some hoops, I would say, in terms of convincing us that her academic interests were real. And we also gave her a lot of information at that time. And again, this may have changed there, but doing what we called an internal transfer. So if you were admitted to arts and science and you now wanted to be in the School of Engineering as a sophomore, there was nothing automatic about that. So it was really important that people understood if they came into a college that wasn't their first choice, that they couldn't assume that, oh, sophomore year, I'll just switch. Some schools that may be possible. At Vanderbilt in the 90s, that wasn't. Again, I'm not sure how they do it currently. I think going back to the direct admission, I think that when it's something specific like that, or it's a 6-year med program or other highly competitive or highly specialized programs, I think this is where the student or the parent asking questions directly of that admissions office are going to be really important.
Okay. And then somebody was asking about financial aid, and kind of the past 2 years, this year and last year, have been atypical because FAFSA hasn't been opened at the normal time. But would people expect to get like a financial aid offer when their student might be given, particularly, I guess, an ED acceptance? An EA acceptance, it might come later.
Right. You're absolutely right that an EA acceptance, it may come later. because the student, again, still has till May 1st to make their enrollment choice. With early decision, many of the schools that do binding early decision do use the College Scholarship Service profile form, which has been available since October 1st. So that would at least give the school and the family an estimated award. But we also, since even though FAFSA only opened on December 1st, there is an expectation. I was talking to a colleague at a school that they're going to notify their early decision students on Friday the 13th. Students have until January 15th to commit, and they feel confident that they will have, as long as the student has submitted the FAFSA, that they will have actual aid awards to them by well, I think they are hoping to have them before the Christmas holiday, but they certainly plan to have them by that end of that first week of January.
And that's a really good point, because at least this year, I mean, FAFSA is now open. It opened up, like the end of November, and some early decision schools, even though they're giving like an estimate, might ask, to get that FAFSA in by a certain deadline within December, so that they can do what
Yes.
you're saying, to kind of give a final decision
Absolutely.
before the student has to, actually commit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, in my experience, if there's been a holdup in getting the financial aid award to a student, schools will typically give them an extension on that enrollment deposit deadline. I think the harder thing for your son or daughter, if they're counting on that early decision school, they get admitted and then they haven't submitted applications elsewhere. If anything's up in the air about the financing of their education, they don't want to miss any of those early
Right.
January deadlines.
Okay, so somebody is asking, and again, you may or may not know, they're saying, my neighbor mentioned that their child was sent an email that the college had interest, but not an admit letter. Do you know what that might mean?
Well, for many years, though this goes back a few decades, there used to be a process that was referred to as the likely letter. And some colleges sent out notifications to students saying, though this is not an official offer of admission, based on what we know about your credentials, you are likely to be offered admission. Um, I, I have.
Wasn't that really more used for athletes?
It was used for athletes, but not exclusively
Okay.
athletes. It was, but often very top students. Um, I think some of the schools that used to do that have now made some of their deadlines earlier and even roll out some regular decision official letters at an earlier date than the last week of March. They might send some out the last week of February to some of their top students, for example. Um, but a letter saying that there's interest, my first question would be, who signed it? Because if it's coming from the admissions office, I would probably try to contact the admissions office to try to get clarification of what this is about. If it's coming from someone else, whether it's a professor or a coach, it's even more important probably to talk to the admissions office to try to get an explanation of how should you be interpreting this letter?
Okay, good advice. Another question about a student being deferred early action. This person is saying that they've heard if sometimes a student is deferred early action, and then the college asks the student to write a new essay. Is that possible and common?
Absolutely. There could be a request for a new writing sample. It could be a request, as I said, for a statement of interest. Um, Interestingly, in some ways, there are also colleges that will defer a student and say, don't send anything else. We don't want a letter of interest, or only send your updated grades. We don't need 3 letters of reference from people who know you well. So you want to always, and those especially are really large universities with really high volume applications. So you want to follow the directions that you're given. That's the most important part.
The next question which is a really good one, and we didn't really talk about it, is and that a lot of people feel that some schools, and I'm not necessarily naming names, might defer or even deny a student really for what people are calling yield protection, because maybe they get the sense that that student applied, but they're not
Mhm.
likely to come, even though, I mean, they applied early action most likely, and so the school wants to kind of, protect what their
Yeah.
yield is ultimately going to be.
So this has been a discussion certainly across the admissions industry for quite a while. Um, there is one college that at one time was doing just that, protecting their yield by actually deferring at early action or waitlisting at regular decision, sort of the top academic slice of their pool, because they believed that those students would choose a different school than theirs. I think more common, this was quite a while ago. My best guess is that's probably not happening as much any longer. Instead, what's happening still, I think, is when I'll use the example, it's a student who lives in Philadelphia and they've applied to a school that's an hour's drive away. And they've made no visit to the campus. They've opened very few emails. They did not talk to the representative at a college fair or a school visit, et cetera. They've had no interaction other than the application. Those students, I mean, we score students on likelihood to yield, and student would have a low score. Now, a similar student from Washington State, from Seattle, applying to that college within an hour of Philly, who hadn't visited, is going to be treated very differently. Now, there's still going to be the hope that they've opened emails, they've communicated with their counselor who's assigned to them, that they've had some interactions, but that sort of campus visit piece isn't going to be as expected. The same would be true if you have somebody who is coming from a wealthier neighborhood and school system. You might expect them to make the campus visit in a way that a young person who's working 20 hours a week part-time to help pay the bills, you don't expect to have make that campus visit quite as easily. So you were looking at those kinds of things for sure. And I think early action deferrals, you could say, could help protect yield, in that the college is waiting to see, is this student going to engage with us now? Since they hadn't engaged with us before, like, are they really interested? This will give them an opportunity to prove they are. And again, remember at the very beginning, I said colleges act in self-interested ways. And so it is definitely the case that there are schools that are saying, gosh, this student doesn't seem like they have earned an offer of admission, so to speak, based on the lack of engagement they've had with us.
Okay, so that's really good advice for both, students who are current seniors, and for juniors. The advice for juniors, what I'm kind of taking out of that is, if you're really interested in a school you're applying early action to, make sure that they see it.
Mhm.
And then for these seniors, if you didn't get the chance to, and you are deferred, and you do want a good shot at getting in even in regular decision, then start showing your interest now.
Right. And again, I think it's also important, to the degree you possibly can, or that your sons and daughters can, is to be authentic with that. And there's a person who just popped into the chat who put a great point in, where they're getting flooded with emails from colleges right now. And so the student's like, whoa, how am I going to sort through all of these? Um, my best advice there is, they don't have to know which ones they're interested in, but as soon as they decide they're not interested in one,
Mm,
unsubscribe, right?
mm.
You might get that 500 colleges, or maybe it's not 500 colleges, but probably 500 emails. So maybe it's 50 colleges. You might get that down to 30 colleges pretty quickly, because the students, they've taken some time, they've learned a little bit, and they're like, no, that's not for me. I'm not gonna go that far away. Just use geo for a moment. So unsubscribe from those. But I think it's really, as much as anything, engaging, I would say, from end of junior year into senior year. It is less important that they're doing that engagement in the junior year. I mean, if they have opportunities to, terrific, but it's not something that's going to, the timing of their engagement is not going to in any way be held against them.
Okay. Somebody is asking, is there any way of knowing when a school is going to release their decisions, or like we just have to kind of sit
Yeah.
back and wait?
So typically, in my experience, colleges will put onto their websites their deadlines and a release by date. So that's the first thing. Check the websites. It may not be there, but usually we all cover ourselves and we'll say will be released by December 20th, even if we're planning to release December 12th, right? So that's an important thing. You need to be prepared that you could come home from work one day and have a grumpy teenager who got bad news from a school a week before you thought any news would be coming. So it's usually a notify by date, not a notify on date. But most schools, so I'll use an example. If it was a November 1st early action deadline or November 15th, most November deadlines will notify students before they go on winter break. If it's a December 1st early action, there's they may be notified before break, but it may well not be until afterward. But
Because they
most
just don't
schools,
have the time to process.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And you also have to remember, like, one of the things that we're all working on right now are transfer applications for spring semester. That's the most important thing for us right now because that's the most immediate. Even though early decision, early action is also very important, there's a lot of balancing that goes on in the offices. I think it's also perfectly fine for you to contact the office and say, do you have an approximate date that you're going to notify? If they do, they'll tell you. If they don't, it could be that they just don't know because maybe they've had a big increase this year, or something else is going on that is causing there to be less certainty in their particular office.
So somebody is asking, and we kind of didn't touch on this, is maybe a little bit to know about early decision 2.
Mhm.
And my question about that would be, I'm just kind of curious, do colleges kind of look at, or do they factor in, oh, well, this person now is applying early decision 2 to us. Like, did they apply someplace else and not get in? And that's why they're applying to us ED2. Like, so it feels like they kind of, it's just natural to think, did something happen in the first round? That's why they're here for ED2.
Yep.
And does that matter?
I would say that certainly there are times where I'm sure there are individual admissions people who make those assumptions, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. And I don't think it matters because there's not sort of a sense typically of, well, if some other college didn't take the student, we don't want to take them. Sometimes it's more of a, boy, they're lost. We're getting a great student out of this. So the fact that the college even offers an ED2, they know what they're getting into. By offering that option, they're hoping to get some of the students who didn't get in ED1 to schools that may be above them in the selectivity chain. I think there are two other kinds of students who we see a lot in early decision round 2. One are fall athletes who have not always been in a position to make their visits and make all their application decisions by a November deadline. And students who are on a positive trend academically.
Mm.
Now, obviously, you have some students who are all A's all the time. That's one kind of positive transcript. But if you have a student who maybe ninth grade wasn't as strong for them, and they got stronger in 10th grade and 11th grade, they hit it out of the park, and in 12th grade, they're doing really well. They want those 12th grade mid-year grades to be part of the decision because they know that that's going to help compensate for that weak ninth grade. It's also the case if a student has changed high schools, that they will often wait for ED2 if they change high school kind of midway through, because they want the person writing their letter to really know them better, their teachers and that sort of thing. So they'll sometimes wait a little bit longer. But again, I would say early decision 2 is a good option, and there are loads of students out there who didn't get into their early decision 1 school or a single choice early action kind of school, or maybe another kind of early action school. And so now they're saying, gosh, I'm going to go ED2 to this other school that I like very much.
So we did go over this, but I think based on this question, it's worth reiterating it. They're saying, if my student got accepted early decision 1, do we have to withdraw other applications sent right away, even before learning if the student was admitted? They would like to know where they're admitted, even though they will honor the ED1 commitment.
They need to withdraw their applications. This is not about scoring points, and keeping their application active to see if they're admitted is very likely causing another young person to not get admitted.
Right.
And so it's unfair to your peer group to keep your application active. The only time it's okay is if you have not gotten confirmation of the financial obligation.
Yeah, because it will hurt another student, because if that, that if you're committed to someplace and a college accepts you, that means they're not accepting somebody else.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. If I visit the campus in 8th grade or freshman year, okay. Well, actually, I mean, you mentioned it, but let's just say there's somebody saying if the student visits a campus in 8th grade or freshman year of high school, will that still count as demonstrated interest?
I think it depends on what they did during those times. I would say 8th grade doesn't count for a lot in most situations for all kinds of reasons. We don't hold 8th grade grades against a student, and we wouldn't really consider a campus visit in the 8th grade typically as a college visit. Now, the family lives in Europe. That's the only time they've been in the States. They came with an older brother. I mean, there are some exceptions for sure. But I think a 9th grade visit, we typically do consider 9th through 12th as high school. And if they did an official campus tour, if they sat in on an information session, if they were an unusually mature and precocious 9th grader who engaged with the process, then they would be able to also talk about what they learned from that process or from that visit in an articulate way. So that is something that I think is really important, that any of this engaging with the school there needs to be some authenticity to it. I just saw that the question about, is a campus visit really important if the school is very far away? It is, I think it's always important for early decision because you're making a commitment to enroll. And if you can possibly see the school before you make that commitment, that's important. With regular decision or early action or rolling in mission, it is not essential to do before applying or learning of admission. It's certainly something that lots of people wait until they get all their offers, see what the bottom line is, and then make their initial visit in the spring before making an enrollment choice. But you should know that if the student's not going to visit prior to applying and it's a selective college, they should find other ways in which to engage. So sometimes it's a Zoom interview. Sometimes it's not an interview at all, but it's some email exchanges. They just need to, again, not be a nameless, faceless, as we describe them, ghost application, an application that's come from nowhere and has no other contact associated.
So this information about demonstrated interest, does show up in the common data set. It's, what is it called? The admission factors.
Mhm.
And it kind of, colleges rank kind of what they view as important, right?
Mhm.
And usually a school that views demonstrated interest, will, I mean, it's usually not the top thing, but it might be the
Sure.
second thing, like, you know.
Right.
And so that's one place to kind of see, you know, how important this interaction is to a school. But are you also, but let's say a school maybe doesn't rank it as high, but you're still recommending that it's important to show this kind of interaction.
Yes, I think that there are a couple things that I think the common data set can be really helpful for lots of reasons, but it's a year out of date.
I
There
know
are
it's
human
people
beings
people
who are
don't
doing,
understand
yeah,
the timing of it.
yeah, and there are human beings who are doing this job, right? And so when someone on a admission staff reads an application and they look at the student record and the student has, opened a couple of emails or a couple of email, they sent an email and they said, can you explain a little bit more about the difference between chemical physics and regular physics at your school, as an example. Um, there's a sense of, oh, this student is interested enough to have asked us a question. I mean, it can be that simple. Or this student has, I mean, because we do look at this, has opened the last 5 emails and has clicked through 3 times to this link on this one email. I mean, it's not scientific always. At some schools it is, but at even the schools where it's not a big part of what's going on, there's still that sense of we want to enroll students we want to admit students who are likely to enroll, and we want to enroll students who we feel know what the college is about. And so even when it is not technically a highly rated admissions factor, it is hard with human nature for it not to be considered. And
Mm.
again, we're talking at really selective places where they're trying to find reasons for yes and reasons for no because they can't possibly admit all of the students they'd like to.
And when you boil it down, I mean, kind of put the college visit aside, it's not really that difficult to show, you know, interest. And so the student who does, he's going to
Mhm.
stand above the student who doesn't, if everything
Right,
else being equal.
exactly.
Okay, another good question. Somebody saying, I've seen some recent posts of early action acceptances where a commitment is needed by mid-January. Um, and it wasn't early decision.
Right.
But how is one supposed to make a commitment to an early action school by mid-January if they haven't heard from other schools?
So this is disappointing to hear, though I don't know that I would say it's actually surprising. Um, some of you may know that there is a professional organization that kind of governs the work of college admissions people. Um, and there used to be a pretty strong code of ethics with penalties for violating certain ethical principles. And that was considered potentially considered restraint of trade by the federal government. And so in fall of 2019, the professional organization agreed to no longer require colleges to follow a set of rules. And so a college now, if they wanted to, could require all the students they admit to tell them by March 1st. There's no longer that May 1st kind of being
Right,
held
and I was gonna say, people,
as a sacred
parents who
date.
have been through this for the
Yeah,
first time might not realize, but in the past, it was May 1st decision day, commit day, and colleges had to kind of adhere to it, and they couldn't require, other than early decision, they couldn't require a student to have to commit before May 1st,
and I think
regardless of when they found out.
right. And part of that, and thank you, Debbie, for that background, because part of it was not very many years ago, the FAFSA form wasn't available till January 1st. And so the theory was students would all have financial aid awards at least by the 1st of April and have a month to choose among the places they'd been offered admission and awarded aid and could make a commitment by May 1st. it has become, to say it's the Wild West is a little bit of an exaggeration, but there are now a lot of new techniques in play where, for example, there are incentives to deposit earlier. If you deposit by X date, you have your first choice in housing. If you deposit by Y date, you get a parking spot. There are all different kinds of things, but this is interesting that that's an early action with a January commitment. The only thing, I mean, I would need to really read and understand what is being said directly, but I think one of the things a family could do would be to contact the school to say, gosh, yes, I'm really, really interested in attending your university, but I really need to hear from the other places before I'm able to make that commitment. May I have an extension? And at some colleges, the school will, in fact, award a deposit extension to students who ask. There are other schools that if you said, I really am very interested in your university, I'd like to make a deposit because I think I'm going to be enrolling, but is it possible to have the deposit be refundable if I request a refund in writing by a certain date? So can I have an extension? Can the deposit be refundable? And then the last option is if a school says, no, you can't have an extension, no, the deposit's not refundable, would be for the family to decide, yes, John's going to put a deposit down at X university, even though if ultimately Z university comes through with an offer that he and we find more compelling, we're just going to give up the $500, for example, that we paid to the first school. It doesn't feel very good because it feels like you're being manipulated to commit to something when you have your fingers crossed behind your back. But I think in the end, you don't want to lose an opportunity that your son or daughter is seriously considering.
And it's unfortunate that, the change in the ethics and some schools kind of moving in this direction, this is a whole domino effect. Now then kind of, force potentially some families to kind of do what you said, which in previous years wouldn't have been accepted or really, it would be strongly frowned upon. But now
Right.
they're not given a choice. They might have to do that if colleges are kind of like, pushing for certain deadlines. So, okay. Well, thank you, Terry. I think great session. A lot of advice. I, hope the best for all the students of the parents who are here, that they hear the answers or the decisions that they want to, but if they don't, I think you have good strategies of how to move forward. And don't let this ruin your holiday season. That's really the bottom
Absolutely.
line.
Again, your goal here is to celebrate your sons and daughters, and whether that means celebrating with happy news from an early decision or early action college, or celebrating the fact that they're going to do fabulously wherever they go. My quick favorite story is a niece who was sure she was going to go to Columbia and applied early to Columbia and told everyone at Thanksgiving that's what she was going to do. Columbia didn't feel the same way. She didn't get admitted. Now she's 35 and can not imagine her life if she had not gone to the University of Chicago, where she not only got a great education, but met her husband of 10 years and her best friends, and is forever grateful that Columbia didn't say yes.
Right, right.
And so I hope for all of your kids that there'll be happy stories, whether they're immediate or in the future.
Absolutely. Good story, good advice. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Please reach out. Let us know, if whatever news you got, and if you have any further questions. Okay. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone.
Take
Good
care.
night.